Hi, we are ready to start our next day's read aloud. We are beginning with Mahmoud, and he's somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea at 2015, 11 days from home. And if you remember right, his dinghy just crashed into some rocks. So let's see what's going on. The cold water was like a slap in Mahmoud's face. Before he could think, he gasped, sucking in a mouthful of the dark Mediterranean Sea. He tumbled backward, head down in the murky water, his arms and feet thrashing, trying to right himself. Someone else fell on top of him, pushing him deeper down into the water. He choked, coughed, swallowed more water. Bodies tumbled into the water above him, beside him, below him, everywhere. His knee struck something hard and sharp, maybe a rock, and he felt a cold flash of pain that quickly disappeared into blind, senseless terror. He was drowning. The rubber dinghy had burst against the rocks, and he was drowning. Mahmoud kicked, paddled, flailed. His face came out of the water, and he gulped down air. And then a wave washed over him again, and he went down. He kicked his way back to the surface and fought to keep his head above water. "Mom! Dad!" Mahmoud cried. His yells were mixed with the screams and cries of the other passengers who had made it back to the surface. All around Mahmoud, survivors thrashed and gasped. Swamped by the choppy waves, there was nothing left of the dinghy. The engine had dragged the rest of it down. Mahmoud saw something bobbing along the water, glowing, a cell phone. It was still sealed tight in his plastic bag, and the air in the bag kept keeping it afloat. Mahmoud swam for it, ducking a wave and pawing the bag into his arms. The glowing phone screen said 2:32 a.m. "Help! Help!" Mahmoud's mother sobbed, her voice recognizable in the chaos. Mahmoud spun, oriented himself, and frog-kicked his way through the waves toward the shape he thought of was his mother. He picked her pink headscarf out of the swirling pandemonium and saw that she was fighting to lift something up out of the water. Hana! Mahmoud swam to his mother. Hana was crying, but she was alive. But it was all Mahmoud's mother could do to keep the baby and her own face above the relentless waves. One or the other of them was going to drown. Mahmoud put his arms around his mother and tried to kick her and Hana both to the surface, but half the time he felt he was dragging him down with him. "Fatima! Mahmoud!" he cried. He heard his father cry. Mahmoud turned to see his father with Walid in his arms. "The life preservers are useless," he roared, his head appearing and disappearing behind the waves. "They're fakes." "Fake?" Mahmoud was furious, but his anger quickly faded. Every ounce of his energy was focused in kicking and swimming. If he stopped, he and his mother and sister would drown. There were other people around them, yelling, searching, fighting to stay afloat. But as far as Mahmoud was concerned, his world was 4 meters around. Where did they go from here? How did they get out of the sea and onto dry land? They were lost in the stormy Mediterranean Sea in the middle of the dark night. Their dinghy was sunk, and though it had run into rocks, there wasn't any land in sight. Mahmoud breathed in seawater through his nose and hacked it up. He fought to breathe, the waves lapping over him, and rain and spray still splashing his face. But his baby sister's cries refocused him. He could not lose her. He couldn't lose any of them. They came together in the water, Mahmoud and his mother and father, all of them helping Hana and Walid and each other stay afloat. Other families and groups did the same, but eventually the little groups drifted apart from each other, none of them knowing which way they were supposed to go. All they could do was stay on top of the next wave, and the next wave, and the next wave. "Kick off your shoes," Mahmoud's father told them. "Anything to lighten you." Time passed. The rain stopped. The waxing moon even peeked out from behind the cloud. But just as quickly it was dark again, and the cold wind and the salt spray and the swelling sea still tormented them. Mahmoud's legs were numb with cold and exhaustion. They felt like two lead weights. He struggled to lift and churn to stay afloat. His mother had been quietly sobbing for what seemed like forever. Her arms no longer held Hana above the water, but just on top of it, like she was pushing along a tiny barge. Mahmoud's father did the same with Walid, trying to save his strength. Hana had gone as quiet as Walid, and Mahmoud wondered if they were still alive. He wouldn't ask. wouldn't. If he didn't ask, he couldn't know for sure, and as long as he didn't know for sure, there was a chance they were still alive. Mahmoud slipped beneath the waves once more, longer this time. It was getting so hard to come up again, to keep himself afloat. He rose again, pushing air out of his nose, but he was tired. So very, very tired. He wished for a respite from swimming, just a moment, just to sit without working his arms or legs, to close his eyes and to go to sleep. Water was sloshing in and out of Mahmoud's ears, but he thought he heard a drone just above the howl of the wind. In Syria, that sound would have sent him ducking for cover, but now it made his eyes widen, his legs kick just a little harder, a little higher. There, coming at them out of the darkness, another dinghy full of people. Mahmoud and his mother and father waved their arms and cried out for help. At last, the people on board saw them, but as the dinghy came closer, it didn't slow down. They weren't going to stop. The front of the dinghy chopped past Mahmoud, and he lunged for one of the handholds on the side. He caught it and grabbed his mother before the dinghy pulled him away. He swung Mom to the side of the dinghy, and she grabbed hold. The wake from it almost swamping Hana. Behind them, Mahmoud's father almost reached for the dinghy but missed. It churned along, bouncing in the chop, and Mahmoud's father and brother disappeared into the darkness. "Dad! Dad!" Mahmoud cried, still holding on to the dinghy. "Let go!" a woman in the dinghy yelled down at him. "You're dragging on us." "Let us in, please," Mahmoud begged. It was all his mother could do to hang on to the dinghy and to Hana. "We can't. There's no room," the man said in the dinghy. "Please," Mahmoud begged. "We're drowning." "I'll call the Coast Guard for you," a man said. I have their number on my phone. Another man reached down and tried to pry Mahmoud's hand from the dinghy. "You're tipping us." "Please," Mahmoud cried. He sobbed with the effort of fighting off the man's fingers and hanging onto the dinghy. "Please take us with you." "No room." "At least take my sister," Mahmoud begged. "She's a baby. She won't take up any room." That caused much yelling and discussion on the boat. A man tried to pry Mahmoud loose again, but he hung on. "Please, please," Mahmoud begged. A woman appeared at the side of the boat, her arms reaching down to Mahmoud's mother, reaching for the baby. Mahmoud's mother lifted the little ball of a wet blanket up to the woman. "Her name is Hana," she said, struggling to be heard over the roar of the engine and the splash of the waves. Someone finally pried Mahmoud's fingers off the side, and he slipped into the water and tumbled in the dinghy's wake. When he came up, he saw his mother had let go of the dinghy too. She was crying great howling tears and tearing at her clothes. Mahmoud swam over to her and wrestled her hands into stillness, and she put her head on Mahmoud's shoulder and sobbed. Mahmoud's sister was gone, and so was his father and brother. Wow, that makes me sad. Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm moving on. I'm going to Joseph, and we'll get back to Mahmoud in a minute, but let's see what is happening with Joseph. Just outside Havana Harbor, 1939, 18 days from home. Joseph tried to hang on to the chair, but his father was still strong enough to yank it out from his hands. Papa stacked it on the tower of furniture he'd already piled up against the door. "We can't let them back in," Papa cried. "They'll come for us again and take us away." It had taken Joseph and his mother a night and a day to put their cabin back together after Otto Schindig and his goons had torn the place up. But in the span of 15 minutes, his father had undone it all again, snatching up anything that wasn't nailed down and stacking it against the door. Ruthie crouched in the corner and crying and hugging Bitsy. Joseph's mother had sewed the stuffed bunny back together first thing, before Ruthie had seen it headless. Aaron, Joseph's mother said now, "you have to calm down. You're scaring your daughter." Scaring was right, Joseph thought, and he was scaring me too. Joseph stared at his father, his skeleton, this crazed ghost. This wasn't his father. The Nazis had taken his father away and replaced him with a madman. "You don't understand," Joseph's father said. "You can't know what they did to people, what they'll do to us." Papa threw an open suitcase on the pile, spilling clothes all over the room. When he'd put everything he could on the barricade, he crawled under the desk at the back of the room like a child playing hide and seek. Mama looked frightened as she tried to figure out what to do. "Ruthie," she said at last, "put your swimsuit on and go to the pool." "I don't want to go swimming," Ruthie said, still crying in the corner. "Do as I say," Mama said. Ruthie pulled herself away from the wall and picked through the clothes and found her swimsuit on the floor. "Joseph," Mama said, low enough for just him to hear, "I'm going to go to the ship's doctor for sleeping draught for your father, something to calm him. I'll take Ruthie to the pool, but I need you to stay here and watch your father." Papa was still curled into a ball under the desk, rocking and muttering to himself. The idea of being here alone with him filled Joseph with dread. "But if the doctor knows he's unwell, they might not let us into Cuba," Joseph whispered, desperate to find some reason to keep his mother with him. "I'll tell the doctor I'm anxious and I haven't been sleeping," Mama said. "I'll tell him the draught is for me." Joseph's mother helped Ruthie finish putting her swimsuit on, and together they were able to pull the haphazard pile of furniture away far enough away from the door to open it. Joseph's father, who'd been so set on building the barricade just minutes before, was so lost in his own mind he didn't even notice. Joseph didn't know what to do with himself, so he started to put the room back together. Papa stayed quiet and still under the desk. Joseph hoped he had gone to sleep. Mama came back within minutes, and Joseph felt an immense sense of relief until he saw the dull, panicked look Mama wore and got scared all over again. She stumbled as she entered the cabin like she couldn't remember how to walk, and Joseph hurried to help her to one of the beds. "Mama, what is it? What's wrong?" Joseph asked. I told the doctor the sleeping draught was for me," she said, her words slow, "and he made me take it right there." "You drank it?" Joseph said. His mother's eyelids fluttered. I had to," she said. After I told him, couldn't let him and know Aaron was really the one who..." Mama's eyelids closed and she swayed. Joseph panicked. She couldn't go to sleep. Not now. How was he supposed to take care of his father? He couldn't do this alone. Mama, don't go to sleep." Her eyes jerked open again, but they had lost their focus. "Your sister," she said. Don't forget your sister. She's at the pool." Her eyes flickered closed and she rolled back onto the bed. No, Joseph said. He tried patting his mother on the cheeks to wake her up, but she was out cold. Joseph got up and paced the room, trying to think. With his mother asleep, he had to watch his father every second. Joseph glanced at him under the desk. Papa was quiet now, but the slightest thing could set him off. Joseph couldn't go for help anyway. If anyone knew his father was unwell, they'd be barred from entering Cuba. But Joseph also had to go get Ruthie at some point and make sure she got dinner and was put to bed. Suddenly, Joseph was the man of the family, the only adult in the family, whether he wanted to be or not. "Have you ever seen a man drown?" Papa asked in a whisper. Joseph jumped. Joseph wasn't sure if Papa was talking to him or just talking, but he wasn't afraid to answer. Afraid to break the quiet spell his father was under. His father kept talking. After the evening roll call, they would choose someone to drown, one every night. They would tie his ankles together and his hands behind his back and tie a gag around his mouth, and then they would hang him upside down with his head in a barrel like a fish, like a big fish on the pier, hanging upside down by his tail. Then they would fill the barrel with water, slowly, so that they could enjoy the panic, so they could laugh. And then the water would rise high enough to cover his nose, and he would breathe in water because there was nothing else he could do. He would breathe in water like a fish, only he wasn't a fish, he was a man. He would thrash around and breathe until he drowned upside down. Joseph's breathing stilled. He caught himself hugging Ruthie's stuffed bunny tight. "Every night they did it, and we all had to stand and watch," his father whispered. "We had to stand and watch, and we couldn't say a word, couldn't move a muscle or we would be next." Tears rolled down Joseph's cheeks. He thought about how he'd treated his father at the Cuban doctor's examination, how he had made his father believe he was back in that place where he'd seen so many awful things. "I can't go back there. I can't go back there," his father whispered. "Can't." His father closed his eyes and put his head between his knees, and soon he was asleep. Joseph sat with his sleeping parents until the cabin started to get dark and he couldn't put off finding Ruthie any longer. He would just have to be as quick as he could. Joseph left the cabin and found his sister splashing around in the pool with the other kids. Joseph asked the steward to bring their dinners to their cabin tonight, and as he led Ruthie back, he congratulated himself on surviving his first day as an adult. Until he opened the door and his father was gone. Joseph dropped Ruthie's hand and got down on his hands and knees, searched under the beds, but his father wasn't there. He wasn't in the cabin at all. No, 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 Joseph cried. He shook his mother, begged her to wake up, but the sleeping draught was too powerful. Joseph spun in the room, trying to figure out what to do. He snatched up Bitsy and put the little stuffed bunny into Ruthie's arms. Stay here, he told Ruthie. Stay here with Mama and don't leave the cabin. Understand? I've got to go find Papa. Joseph ran Joseph ran out the door and into the passageway. But where to now? Where would his father go? Papa hadn't left the cabin the whole trip, and now he decided to leave? Joseph heard a commotion and he sprinted up the stairs to A deck. Up ahead, a man was helping a woman to her feet, and both of them were looking angrily over their shoulders in the direction Papa must have run. And that's when Joseph remembered. His father had left the cabin before, to watch them bury Professor Wheeler at sea. Somewhere up ahead, a woman screamed, and Joseph took off at a run. He felt as though he was outside himself, like he existed like outside his own skin, and he watched himself slam into the rail and look over the side. Someone yelled, "Man, overboard!" and the ship's siren shrieked. Joseph's father had jumped into the sea. Oh my. Both Joseph and Mahmoud are experiencing such tragic, and it's like they have these common things, but they're happening in different times, and they're both having to become grown-ups before they're really supposed to become grown-ups. But I'm thinking that a theme is when you are in a moment of tragedy, you have to take on responsibility that you normally don't have to. And sometimes maybe that's what some of us are experiencing right now. When we are in a moment of unknown and unsureness, we are having to do things that we normally don't have to do. I wonder, as we read about Isabel, if she's going to have some of that same expectations placed upon her. Let's find out. Isabel, somewhere on the Caribbean Sea, 1994, 3 days from home. Isabel woke to a warm orange glow on the horizon and a silver sea stretching out before them like a mirror. It was as though the storm had been some kind of feverish nightmare. Senor Castillo woke from his nightmare too, parched like a man who'd been lost in the desert. He drank almost half of one of the few gallons of water they had left in one long chug, then laid back against the side of the boat. Isabel worried about her mother. For Mommy, the nightmare was just beginning. The illness she'd felt as the storm began had gotten worse in the night, and now she had a fever hotter than the rising sun. Lido dipped a scrap of the shirt into cool seawater and draped it across her daughter's forehead to cool her. But without the aspirin from the lost medicine box, there was no way to bring the fever down. The baby, Mommy moaned, holding her stomach. The baby will be fine, Lido told her. A good, strong, healthy baby boy. Lido and Senora Castillo took care of Isabel's mother. Papi and Luis got the engines restarted and bathed it with water to keep it cool. Amara at the rudder steered them north, now that the sun was in the sky. Everybody had a job, it seemed, except Isabel and Ivan. Isabel bumped shoulders and stepped on toes as she wobbled her way over to Ivan in the prow of the boat. She sat down beside him with a huff. "Oh, I feel useless," she told Ivan. "I know," he said. "Me too." They sat for a while in silence before Ivan said, "Do you think we'll have to do algebra in our new American school?" Isabel laughed. "Yes." "Will they have political rallies every day at school in the U.S.? Will we have to work in the fields all afternoon?" His eyes went wide. "Do you think we'll have to carry guns to protect us from all the shootings?" "Oh, I don't know," Isabel told him. Their teachers told them all the time how homeless people starved in the streets of the U.S., and how people who couldn't afford to pay for doctors got sick and died, and how thousands of people were killed by guns every year. As happy as she had been to go to El Norte, Isabel suddenly worried that it wouldn't be as magical of a place as everyone in the boat believed. No matter what, I'm glad you came with us, Ivan said. Now we can live next door to each other forever. Isabel blushed and looked at her feet. She liked that thought, too. Castro's face was even more submerged now, which meant they were taking on more water. Between the tanker and the storm, the little boat had suffered a pounding, and it had never been very seaworthy to begin with. Senor Castillo had only expected the boat to be on the water for a day, 2 at the very most. How much longer would it take them to get to Florida? And where exactly were they? Hey, is that land? Ivan asked. He pointed over the side of the boat. Isabel and the others scrambled so quickly to see that the boat tipped dangerously in the water. Yes, Isabel could see it. A long, thin, dark green line along the blue horizon. Land. Is it Florida? Ivan asked. It's on the wrong side of the boat to be the U.S., Luis said, looking back at the sun, unless we got blown into the Gulf of Mexico overnight. Whatever it is, I'm steering for it, Amara told them. Everyone watched in silence as the green line turned into hills and trees and the water got clearer and shallower. Isabel held her breath. She had never been so excited in her entire life. Was it really the United States? Had they made it? Amara brought them closer to shore, then turned and ran south along it. Isabel searched the shore. There! She pointed to the red and yellow beach umbrellas with chairs underneath them, and in the beach chairs were white people. A woman in a bikini lifted her black sunglasses and pointed to them, and the man with her sat up and stared at the boat around the beach. Isabel saw more people all staring and pointing and waving. Yes, we made it, Isabel said, shaking Ivan's arms. Ivan hopped up and down, so much the boat groaned. Florida, he cried. A black man in a white suit hurried down the beach toward them, waving his arms over his head to get their attention. He yelled something in English and pointed for them to go farther south. Amara followed the shore around a bend, and the open ocean gave way to a quiet little bay with a long wooden pier. The pier had a little cafe on it with tables and chairs. Fancy 2-man sailboats were parked on the beach next to the volleyball courts, and more umbrellas and chairs dotted the sand. Isabel's heart leaped. The U.S. was even more of a paradise than she'd ever imagined. Luis flipped a switch, and the sputter and the putter of the engine died. The white people got up from their tables at the bar and helped pull them to the dock, and Isabel and the others reached for their hands. Their fingertips were almost close enough to touch when black men in white short-sleeve uniforms pushed their way between the vacationers on the pier and the boat. One of them said something in a language Isabel didn't quite understand. I think he's asking us if we're from Haiti, Lito said to the others in the boat. We are from Cuba, he said, slowly in Spanish to the uniformed man. You're from Cuba? The officer asked in Spanish. Yes, they cried. Where are we? Papi asked. The Bahamas, the man said. The Bahamas? Isabel's mind went back to the map of the Caribbean on the wall of the schoolroom. The Bahamas were islands to the north and east of Havana, directly above the middle of Cuba, a long way east of Miami. Had the storm really taken them that far off course? I'm sorry, the officer said, but you are not allowed to land. Bahamian law forbids the entrance of illegal aliens into the Bahamas. If you set foot on Bahamian soil, you will be taken into custody and returned to your country of origin. Behind the officers, one of the tourists who knew Spanish was translating for the others. Some of them looked upset and started arguing with the authorities. But we have a sick pregnant woman, Lito said to the officer. He moved to the men on the dock. So the men on the dock could see Isabel's mother, and the tourists behind the officers cried out in concern. The officers conferred, and Isabel held her breath. The commandant says that for health reasons, the pregnant woman may come ashore and receive medical attention, the Spanish-speaking officer said. Isabel and Ivan clutched at each other with hope. But she cannot have her baby here, the officer said. As soon as she is well, she will be deported to Cuba. Isabel and Ivan sagged, and everyone else on the little boat was silent. Isabel felt sick. She wanted her mother to get better, but she didn't want her to be sent back to Cuba. Couldn't the Bahamas just let them stay? How was one more Cuban family going to hurt? She looked back at the pier and nice cafe. They had plenty of room right there. The situation was explained to the tourists on the pier, and they gasped and waited. All right, Lito said. My daughter is sick. She needs medical attention. No, Puppy said. You heard him. If we step off this boat, they'll send us back to Cuba. I'm not going back. Then I will go with her, Lito said. I care for Teresa's life more than I care for El Norte. Tears ran down Isabel's cheek. No, this wasn't the way things were supposed to happen. Her family was supposed to be together. That's why she'd insisted they all go on the boat. And if her mother went back to Cuba and her father went on to the United States, which one was she supposed to go with? Lito started to lift Isabel's mother, but Mommy pushed him away. No, Isabel's mother said. But Teresa, Lito said. No, I don't want my baby born in Cuba. But you're ill. You can't take another ocean voyage, Lito argued. I will not go back, Mommy said. She reached up and took her husband's and her daughter's hands. I will stay with my family. Relieved, Isabel threw herself into her mother's arms. She was surprised when she felt her father kneel down in the boat and hug them both. It sounds like we're leaving then, Luis told them. Everyone in the boat. Before they could get the engine restarted, one of the tourists tossed down a bottle of water to Senora Castillo. Soon, the rest of the tourists were hurrying back and forth through the cafe, buying bottles of water and bags of chips and tossing them into everyone's hands on the boat. Aspirin! Does anyone have aspirin for my mother? Isabel begged. Up on the dock, an old white woman understood. She quickly dug around in her big purse and tossed a plastic bottle full of pills to Isabel. Thank you, Isabel cried. Her heart ached with gratitude toward these people. Just a moment's kindness from each of them might mean the difference between death and survival for her mother and everyone else on the raft. By the time they finally restarted the engine and Amara swung them around to leave, they had more food and water than they had brought with them to begin with, but they were farther away from Florida and freedom than they had ever been before. Wow. We really have a lot of tragedy going on and a lot of strife. Things are not happening and not going well. I'm wondering if there's going to be a turn of good luck for each group of people, or how they're going to have to deal with the strife and the struggles more. And the young kids are having to step up and be the adults in the family. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out. Be sure that you join me tomorrow for more of our book, where we start with Mahmoud. He is still at the Mediterranean Sea, and he's still about 11 days from home. So we'll see. Bye.